So we've been talking about this idea called bad ideas and looking at some belief systems, some thoughts, some ways that we act and live, and trying to come at them maybe a little bit sideways and unpack it a little bit, figure out if we're really following what God would have for us. And so today's bad idea is the idea of comfort. And we'll get to that in a moment. I've been able to come up with a few pictures and a couple of videos just for something fun to start off with. Today, this is a little bit different vein or a little different spirit, but instead of bad ideas, I came up with some people that were having a bad day. So I have found a couple of stories of people having a bad day. And so, you know, if maybe this last week or a few of the days or whatever have been bad for you, you might find solace that at least it's not this bad, okay? So hopefully these will be humorous. But this first one was really kind of interesting. And keep in mind, apparently this story happened some years ago. That'll make more sense in a moment. But there's a woman that came home, and she found her husband in the kitchen, and he was shaking frantically in this frenzy, and he had some kind of electrical wires running up into his head. And she assumed that he was being shocked by electricity in some strange accident or project that he was working on. And so, intending to jolt him away from the deadly current, she went and found a plank of wood and whacked him with it to set him free. Well, it worked. Though it broke his arm, it successfully jarred him away from the wires, which up until that moment he had been happily listening to his new Walkman stereo. Never seen one before, I guess. I found one more, and the story goes that a man was working on his motorcycle out in the backyard, and his wife was nearby in the kitchen, and he was kind of revving up the motor when the motorcycle accidentally slipped into gear, and it drug him through the sliding glass window and into the dining room. Well, his wife come running out to find him, and then, of course, called to make arrangements for his ambulance ride to the hospital. And they took him off, and while the attendants were loading her husband up, the wife stayed behind to pick up the motorcycle, clean up the mess, and so on. Well, she blotted up a bunch of gasoline that had spilled with a bunch of paper towels, and she didn't know what to do with them, so she tossed them into a nearby toilet. Well, later that day, her husband was treated and released and sent home, and he was okay. And upon returning home, he looked at the mess and the broken window, slider door, and his messed up motorcycle that he loved and had been working so hard on. And he just needed to console himself with a cigarette. So he goes into the bathroom and lights a cigarette, which he later flipped into the toilet, causing an explosion that his wife heard outside, and she comes running in to find her husband laying on the floor, his pants blown off and his buttocks burned. So she calls for another ambulance ride, to which the same paramedic crew shows up, asking what happened this time. And upon hearing this story, they began to laugh so hard, one of the attendants slipped, dropped the stretcher, the man fell off the bed and bounced the last couple of stairs down to the street. Now that's a bad day. But it has nothing to do with motorcycles being a bad idea. I want to throw that in. I want to make sure. Okay, well, just for fun. So bad ideas, and we've looked at different things, different bad ideas, and thought through them. And I want to talk to you about the bad idea of comfort, because I would suggest that a lot of us are looking for and hoping to find a great sense of comfort in our lives, and even might believe that the reason we become a Christian, or the reason we seek after God, or the thing that we most ask and desire from Him, is that He would take care of us and give us that comfortable life. And I'd ask you to evaluate, see if any of these might ring in your ear just a little bit, but what kind of a life are you seeking from God? What are you hoping to get from God? What are you hoping He would bring into your life? And here's just, well, I'll give three, and then I want to look at a fourth, but here's three things that I think that we sometimes are looking for, and perhaps it could be a longer list, but I think for one thing, a lot of people are looking for safety. We're looking for safety. That's been probably the most central question as we're talking about this trip to Kenya. If we go, will we be safe? If we take off and head off, some people have said absolutely there's no way they would go because they don't know if they would be safe. Others said, absolutely, you can't go because they've got a spouse that thinks they won't be safe. And I understand there's danger, there is a potential for a variety of things to go wrong. And so the idea of going on this trip has brought up that question, but will we be safe? Some have even said there's no way that we should send people to go on this trip because it may not be safe. And we want God to set a hedge of protection around our lives so that nothing ever goes wrong and it ever goes bad. And I think for some of us, we're looking for God to keep us safe. For others, perhaps it's security. This can be similar, but it seems like some people just want God to take care of them in such a way that nothing ever goes wrong and they'll always be comfortable and they'll have everything in their lives blessed. We might even seek after God so that life goes smoothly and easily. God, take care of this. God, give me that. And our prayer life oftentimes devolves down not into the things that we want God to send us into, but that God would protect us from or give to us. How often is prayer mostly spent on God, take care of this and give me that and help me here and fix this and take care of these things? So often our prayer life is about security, asking God to take care of us and to make things go smoothly and help them to go easily. And I came across, it really wasn't about the kind of life we might seek from God, but just the way we tend to live in general. And a guy was talking about, I was reading this little blog, and he was talking about relationships, and he was talking about careers, and he was talking about successful families and all these kinds of things. And he said, I believe an important question is this: what pain do you want in your life? Or what are you willing to struggle for? Because oftentimes we find it's only the pain, it's only the fight, it's only the things that we're willing to sacrifice and do, it's only the hard stuff that really takes us in life to where we want to go or where we might need to go. It's the struggle that makes things different and hopefully, prayerfully, even better. And so when we might be seeking security and just to be taken care of, perhaps God is calling us into the hard things, the difficult, even the painful things of life. I was, as I reflected upon this, I even thought that if you have any fear in your life, if you have any frustration and anxiety in your life, if you have any areas in your life where you're frustrated, upset, or any of these kinds of negative emotions, perhaps it comes back to some sense of security. That the problems that we face, the issues that we struggle with, the areas in our lives that are just kind of out of sorts and we're all worried and frustrated, upset about it, might simply mean that we just don't feel secure. For others, they want a life of success. They want a life that's full of rewards, of freedoms and pleasures. That their life would just be filled with all kinds of good things. that everything they set their hand to would just magically go well, that God would bless them in their careers. God would bless them in their pursuit of making money. God would bless us in the pursuit of having more things, that God would raise us up into areas of position and of power, that God would cause us to be people that stand out and have everything that we wanted. And I'm not even suggesting that these are horrible prayers. Of course, we want to ask God to bless us in our lives and to help us in the areas where we set our hands to things. But this is the fourth one that I would like to suggest to you this morning, that better than safety, better than security, and better than success, God is calling you to a life of significance. And it's oftentimes not found in those other areas. I don't think that anyone has ever admired another person because their life was easy. I don't think the heroes and the people that we look to that change the world around us, the people that stand out and do amazing things with their life, I don't think we look to them and honor them because we thought they had it so easy. But instead they were willing to do the hard things of life. And it just seems today that we are no longer familiar with words like honor, like commitment, like duty, or sacrifice. We sat in a wedding just last night where they shared their vows to love, cherish, honor, and work through every hardship and enjoy every blessing for the rest of their lives. We've already begun to pray that they will remain true to those words and that they will enjoy that commitment with each other. But how many of us know that those words these days mean almost nothing anymore? And we live our lives that we will be honorable and sacrificial until we don't want to be those things anymore. And we're a culture that looks for all that we can have instead of a culture that looks to what we can give and what we can do. God calls us to a life of significance that's not found in living the easy life. I want to take us to Luke chapter 9 this morning for a text. And as you're looking there, I want to set this up just a little bit because as I reflected upon it this week, just some things stood out that I hadn't thought through before. But in Luke chapter 9, we find some stories where the disciples had been sent out by Jesus to go into neighboring areas and towns and begin preaching the good news about him. And on those trips, they shared the message of Jesus. They saw people being healed, and they come back and they have all kinds of amazing stories about this mission trip that they were on. How God moved in their midst, and people came to faith, and they were just so excited about all the amazing things that they had seen and they themselves were a part of. And so then, after that, Jesus takes them on a little retreat. He says, okay, you've worked hard, you've done this, let's go on to this little retreat. And they just go out to this town of Bethsaida and to kind of get away. He was probably going to debrief them on what had happened. They were probably going to talk about it. Maybe he'd teach them a little bit more. But what happened is all the people, everywhere Jesus went, people were so excited and so desirous to find him that they would flock to where he was. So they're going on this little getaway retreat, and crowds by the thousands follow him to this area. The disciples tell Jesus, hey, it's getting late today. We need to send these guys home. And Jesus said, no, I want you to feed them. And so the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 happens, right? But the text says it's the 5,000 men. That's what they counted, estimated, or however that worked. So there was women and maybe some children there as well. So we're talking about a lot more people than just 5,000. And they feed all of them with a couple loaves of bread and a couple fish. And this amazing miracle happens. And I'm thinking, after this amazing mission trip, after this incredible miracle that happens before their very eyes that they just don't understand and can't have any explanation for whatsoever, I imagine the disciples are riding pretty high at this point. I mean, the power is flowing. The miracles are happening. The message is spreading. And Jesus is the talk not only of the town, but the entire land. So much so that people from all around are flocking in and coming to meet with Jesus. And I just kind of thought, it just seems like that's every pastor and every church's dream, to have ministry like that. I'm so glad some of you guys have probably driven all the way from the other side of Crestline to come in for an amazing sermon today. But I mean, they weren't driving there. They were walking for miles and miles and days just to get a glimpse of Jesus. And the disciples had this front row seat of everything that was going on. They were right in the middle of it, and they were even a part of it. And the things they saw Jesus do, they were even able themselves to some degree. And this thing was growing and exploding, and it was so incredible what was happening. So after all that happens, and I don't know how much time passes, a little bit of time has passed, Jesus finally gets alone with the disciples. They're riding up here, and Jesus has an interesting conversation with them. And he says to them, so who do the people say that I am? Remember that question? Who do the people say that I am? And Peter says, his answer was, you are God's Messiah. I mean, it just emboldens them more. They thought, we know who he is, and we see what he's here to do. And it's all starting to happen. The ministry is rocking. Lives are changing. And they know they are in the presence of God himself, the Messiah of God. And they're his best friends. They're his ministry partners. They're the leaders of everything that God is going to be doing in the land. And they know it. They see it. Jesus even recognizes what they say, and he says, good job, Peter. You got it right. You know what's going on. You see what's happening. I mean, what an amazing moment. As God's people, the Israelites, have been waiting for the promise of the Messiah for hundreds of years. And now they're sitting at his feet, watching him change the landscape of the world forever. And Jesus then gives them what for the rest of the morning we'll call the death talk. They're riding up high, and he says, now it's going to cost you everything. Now you have to give it all up. And everything that you think is important, everything that you center your life around, everything you've learned, everything you've based your faith on, everything that you've experienced, everything you've ever wanted in your life, it all goes on the sacrificial cross. And you give it to God. Luke 9:21. So Jesus is having this conversation with them, and he says this. He warned them not to tell this to anyone. That's about the fact that he is God's Messiah. And then he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed on the third day to be raised to life. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. You know, amazing, isn't it? Jesus' pep talk I mean, we're used to pep talks like, okay, guys, you've worked hard, you've trained, you're ready, we're here, everything's good, you've got the crowd behind you, you're the best team I've ever had, we're going out on that field, I've watched the other guys, you can handle them, we're going to take them out, and we're going to win this thing. Those are the kind of pep talks we're used to. Everything's going to go great. Everything's going to be awesome. We can win. Jesus' pep talk is just a little bit different. He says, if you want to follow me, you have to die to yourself. If you want a life of significance, you have to release your will and seek after God's. Following Jesus is not a life of comfort, and it's not an easy road. It requires sacrifice, responsibility, and a lot of hard work. And it's the only path that Jesus has laid before each of us. I remember a few years back, kind of an interesting coincidence, that two women in our church, in this church here, had knee surgery within days of each other. I think I'll say this just because it's such an amazing story. I'm thinking of Juanita, and her family's here today. But I remember when she had knee surgery. But all these two ladies, one was in her 70s, if I'm right, I'm thinking she was around her 70s. And the other lady was only in her 40s. In fact, when she went in and was talking about so much knee trouble and pain, I remember her sharing with me how she had to fight really hard to actually get the knee surgery because she was so young. But she finally got the approval, and so within a couple of days of each other, they each had their surgeries. And so for the next few weeks, months, and so on, we watched their recovery, and it was amazing to me to watch the recovery of the 70-year-old, of Juanita, because she talked about going into therapy, and with tears and screams, they tortured her, and they bent her, and they worked her, and it was so difficult, and she pushed through, and her recovery was painful, but steady and predictable, and she eventually did very well. And then I talked with the 40-year-old. Much younger body, much healthier, at least opportunity-wise. And she talked about, and I asked her how her recovery was going, and she talked about pain, and she couldn't keep up with her exercises. She skipped appointments because she didn't feel like going, and she just didn't follow through with the recovery in the same way, and it took twice as long, and it was half of the effectiveness. And it just reminded me of how work and effort and sacrifice are the only ways that we get to the goal. It's not always easy to continue to do the Lord's work or to do what we are being called to do. But if it's important and if it's the right things, we should do it anyways. I was thinking of the team of our ladies that volunteer to work with our children's group downstairs every week. And I think when their week comes up, there's a lot of, oh, I got to get the materials and I got to get ready. And they go down looking great. They come back up with their hair a little bit undone. But they serve knowing that they're helping these children grow in the knowledge of the stories of the Bible, and that they might meet Jesus Christ and come to know Him in their lives. I was thinking of the teams that have, different people that in many ways have helped young couples or even older couples walk into the vows of marriage. Mentoring, or through cooking food, or through decorating and setting up, or through the cleaning and the teardown that takes place afterwards. It's a lot of work. But they give their time, and they help young couples, or they help new couples begin that life together. I was thinking of yesterday, we had a funeral here. It was a family that I didn't know. It was kind of an interesting thing. They came thinking that Pastor Jeff's church, if you remember when Victorious Warriors for Christ was here, they came looking for Pastor Jeff. We didn't know how to get in touch with him in time, and they asked if I would do this funeral. And so we did, and there was a lot of people here laying an uncle, a friend, a father, a husband to rest. And through tears and some laughter, they shared their stories, and they tried to find comfort and a direction to move on. And I just thought, how many times have we as a church, different people, different ways, just even to have a facility where we can help people walk through one of the most difficult times of their life, simply because we were faithful and we were willing to serve. This morning there is a group of leaders that when you go home or go off to your lunch and your afternoon nap, a group of leaders will stay behind because they'll pray for the church and they'll discuss issues that we need to deal with, and they're going to give up their afternoon so that we can continue to develop and grow the ministries of our church. I was thinking about all those people that have donated money or helped to organize an event or volunteered in a fundraiser to raise support to literally save the lives of children at Shim. The things that we're doing are not always easy, but they are always important when we do them for God. And these efforts, and many, many more, oftentimes go unseen. They're not very glamorous. They're thankless jobs. They interfere with other things that we could do and oftentimes would rather do. But they make a difference, and they bring about significance. We were talking a little bit this morning, and I didn't plan this, but a couple of us guys were in the back, and somebody suggested that they just heard I think a comedian was saying that the reason we're not having any new great advancements these days and new inventions and great ideas is because all the great thinkers of our time are at home watching movies and playing video games. And how many of us fear, tremble even that statement is far too true. You serve, you work, you make a difference in some way. Maybe you share Jesus in your workplace, and it makes you uncomfortable, it's a little bit difficult. But you have somebody that you just are praying for, and you wish that they know that God loves them. Jesus died for them, and they can have a brand new life with Him. Maybe you pray in your closet for our church, for our country, for people that are in your life that you care about. You seek God's guidance and direction. You ask Him daily to change you and make you into the person that He wants you to be. Maybe you spend time over a cup of coffee listening to the problems of your friend. And there's even those moments where you think, oh, here they come again. But you're faithful. And you're committed, and you're in it with them to support them and to guide them towards the things of God. Maybe you decided you'll sign up one more time. You'll stand in the hot sun for a couple hours trying to sell some junk and ship your pastor off to Kenya. But you think, okay, I'll volunteer somewhere. I'll get in there. I'll do something one more time. I guarantee you that nothing gets done by people who are looking for comfort. Nothing is accomplished by taking the easy road. And so I ask, what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of life do you want to live? Years ago, I was taking a group of teenagers down into Mexico for a week. Our first stop was in San Diego to get some food together and some last bit of training before we went. And that's an amazing thing to begin with. I think it cost us about $500 a student. They had to do fundraisers and save money and ask mom and dad. And we spent a whole year just planning on a trip that we had to pay for to go to Mexico, where we had limited resources, no good water, hard to get food. And we were going to work while we were down there in the hot sun. This wasn't a vacation. And I often found that students were loving to go on these trips. And so I had a van load, and we're heading down. We're in San Diego, and our guide was going through some stuff we needed to know. And at the end of his little talk, he asked us to go around the circle and think about and answer the question, why were we going on this trip? Why were you going? What was the motivation? And so we went around the circle, and different people had different thoughts, and they were sharing. And I love to hear all the responses. Some of them really wanted to help the children that we were going to go to an orphanage. Some of them wanted the experience of a new culture. They'd never been out of the country before. Some of them wanted to represent Jesus, and so on. The answers had similarities, but they all had different aspects to it as well. And then it got to me. And it just hit me, just totally unexpectedly. As I opened my mouth and began to speak, I just began to weep uncontrollably. And I squeaked out the words, I just want my life to matter. And the guide made a little joke. He says, boy, you're a little young to have a nervous breakdown, aren't you? And it lightened it up a little bit, and then we had prayer and prepared to leave for Ensenada. But I think all of us want our lives to matter. So what are you giving your life to? Where are you finding significance? Are you finding it in the things that you have? Are you trying to find it in success, in doing more, being more important and being recognized, having more things? Are you trying to find it in safety or security, just being comfortable and knowing that life is always going to work out and be okay? Or would you take up Jesus' challenge that says, if you want to save your life, then lose it for me? Let's pray.